The following video contains massive spoilers for Bioshock, so if you haven't played it, don't watch this. Bioshock came out in 2007 for every major console at the time. No, not you! It was met with critical praise and overwhelming fan reception, due in no small part to its engaging narrative, stunning settings, and fantastic gameplay. On top of this, Bioshock was a pioneer in tackling a lot of heavy issues, which were interwoven into its narrative, that we haven't seen a lot in games and still don't, especially in big AAA games, dealing with issues of philosophy, objectivism, violence towards children, alternate forms of governing, and even allusions to stem cell research. It even had its own moral choices dropped right at the player's feet. Do you harvest the little sisters for their atom, or do you let them be? Unlike most games at the time, there was no real counter or gauge to tell you if you were following the moral path, because if you need a gauge to tell you not to kill little girls, you have a lot of issues. At least that's what my therapist tells me. Now, any one of these aspects of the game could easily be considered worthy of a whole video in and of itself, but what I want to talk about today is this moment.
Stop, would you kindly? Powerful phrase. Familiar phrase. Sit, would you kindly? Stand, would you kindly? Run. Stop. Turn. A man chooses. A slave obeys.
Yes, Bioshock's big reveal that you, the protagonist, Jack be doing bad things, has been a brainwashed puppet this entire time. Let me get real for a second. Luke, I am your father. It's a good reveal. Bruce Willis dead in The Sixth Sense. It's a pretty good reveal. No word of a lie, the would you kindly reveal is probably the greatest twist in the history of video games since Super Mario 2 turned out to be a dream. But I digress. Why talk about the single aspect of the game when so many other channels and articles and random people on the streets have talked about it at length? Well, for one thing, because it's my fucking video, I'll do what I want, and you're not even my real stepdad, Craig! But also because this single reveal actually transcends the game it's in, affecting the gamers themselves and how they view the medium as a whole. You see, at this point in time, gaming was now just something we had. Entire generations had grown up knowing gaming, not just as a new fad for kids with pockets full of quarters, but as a genuine part of a lot of people's identities. For those who had grown up on the likes of the NES and other older systems, they too had seen a shift in the types of games being made. No longer were we limited to the cute and colourful platformers of old, or the simplistic stories of good guys versus villains that felt like Skeletor had been copy-pasted into a million different forms. The subject matter of gaming had begun to mature and transform itself. Sure, it had a slow start with SNES games and its first foray into deep and gripping narratives in the PS1 era, but story and game had only really begun to be fully embraced in the PS2 era. And I know, there's already people smashing their keyboards and screaming about the likes of Half-Life and System Shock, maybe Baldur's Gate, but to them I say, but those are all PC games, so console games were really playing catch-up. Console games now had to have a fully formed and realised narrative. Much like how experimentation of gameplay and mechanics took place in the early years of 2D and 3D gaming, so too did narrative experimentation begin. But what does this have to do with Bioshock? Well, everything. You see, even though the narrative, as well as the games themselves, had been ever evolving, one thing remained in their way. Games often like to present the illusions of choice or tell you that they are letting you play your way, but ultimately, this isn't the case. For example, in a game like Mass Effect, where you're given dialogue options during conversation that feel as though they change the overall course of the story, when ultimately they don't. You still have to stop the Reapers and save the day. There is no alternate ending where Shepard kills the Reapers, then in the ensuing chaos takes control of the fractured government, and creates an evil empire, then begins its eons-long rule over the galaxy. Heck, even in play-your-way games like Deus Ex, if you've been playing the stealthy, non-lethal way, you're screwed when this dipshit with rocket arms decides you're the perfect size for him to store all his bullets in the most fun way possible.
Sometimes I feel I've got to run away.
Every time you say it's playing my way, I'll always say to myself, what if I don't want to be the Dragonborn? What if I just want to farm potatoes by day and murder innocent maidens by night like some sort of fantasy Jack the Ripper? Sure, I can do that, but the game world isn't being affected by my actions in the same grand scale as compared to when I'm playing along the predetermined narrative. Nowadays, so many games try to trick us into thinking that we have some form of agency and choice, but it's more like a guided tour at Disney World where we're always forced to be the member of the audience that participates. Plus, if you do well enough, Donald Duck invites you backstage for punch that reeks of cheap whiskey. Now, there's nothing wrong with playing a pre-assigned role in a narrative with limited choices on your behalf. I mean, it's good enough way for the likes of every other game in the world. So why is Bioshock so special? For one, it doesn't even claim to be play your way, and rarely do your decisions affect the story outside of the ending. Hell, unlike in Elder Scrolls, your character isn't even yours to customize. His motivation, history, and appearance are all decided for you by the game, with you having no say in the matter. As if you, the player, had no say at all in the whole situation. And here's where we start to identify Jack as a person. We didn't have a choice when it came to playing as Jack, but Jack himself didn't have a say when venturing to Rapture. He's forced to come here, and he's forced to proceed. Furthermore, upon arriving in Rapture, Jack's choices are completely and utterly stripped away due to the control phrase, "would you kindly." From here on out, Jack, as well as we the player, are merely passengers in our own body, helpless to fight orders given to us by some dickhead on the other side of a phone. So yeah, we know why it's so effective in terms of Bioshock's narrative, but how does it transcend the game itself? Well, remember before how I spoke about how games like to say you can play how you want? The reality of it is that, well, yeah, we can pick what weapon we use or when to hit a button to do a thing. We're trapped within the confines of the narrative, and we've been conditioned to do so since the very start of gaming. We rarely, if ever, ask, why are we saving the princess? Why are we the only ones who can stop the villain? Why can't I do something else in this grand and epic world? Bioshock thrives on that kind of thinking. The player has been conditioned to accept the rule of gaming, that we must follow the instructions the game gives us in order to proceed. The game is only going to share the rest of its world once we fill our quota of enemies killed, items collected, etc. On top of that, it's the wording of the key phrase that really hits home. We're not being demanded by the game to go to a certain area or collect a certain number of numbers. We're politely being asked to take part in the story. We're being invited to take part in Bioshock, and we do it without question. Like Jack, we the player have been conditioned for this, so when we're asked to go here and do this, we're more than happy to do as we're told, and get the job done. It also doesn't hurt that the voice talking to us could be considered the only friendly NPC, making us even more accommodating. And oh boy, when that reveal happens, it feels like a golf club being driven through our skull. Now here's the thing, narrative dissonance is a real thing in video games. How many times have you been playing a game only for it to take total control away from you in order to give you the narrative in the form of a cutscene? Sure, it's the best way to deliver the story, but the problem is games are an interactive media, and all too often, the disconnect between the narrative and the interactive elements are night and day. Not only is control of the character taken away from you, but the camera completely changes as well. No longer is it the wide shot we're used to, instead replaced with emulation of real camera techniques and styles. Even in a game with fixed camera angles, this proves to be the case, because the gameplay world doesn't seek to supplement the narrative world of the game. More often than not, the camera style of the game would negatively impact that of the game's cinematics, making it so the only solution is to wrestle control of the game away from the player to deliver the story. Many first-person games, however, combat this issue perfectly, or at the very least, have the potential to. Rather than taking control away from the player and create a narrative interactive dissonance, they instead retain the same first-person perspective of the camera while delivering the plot and only really seek to draw our attention to the important things happening in the story at the time. It acts more like Luke rather than So while we may still have control lessened from us in these moments, the same style of camera is retained, as well as the more restrained approach to merely point our view in the right direction. Now this by no means is a technique that should be applied to every single game in the world. Some games specifically want to separate their narrative world from their gameplay world, such as the likes of Metal Gear Solid and Devil May Cry, both of which opt for more cinematic techniques in terms of camera styles and movement, as well as having the capabilities of characters altered for the sake of a cutscene. However, for a game like Bioshock, keeping you in the world is important. That's why there's so little difference between the gameplay and narrative aspects. Not to mention, this plot twist would have reduced impact if it were in a lesser game. We feel fully involved in the world of Rapture. We're an active participant, and the only real time the game takes the control away is to show us we never had any control to begin with. It's as jarring to us the player as it is to Jack the protagonist. Couple that with our own conditioning to blindly follow games like Jack follows orders, and we have ourselves one of the finest conceptual plot twists in gaming. It's at this point we're shown a montage of all our orders and how retroactively things don't seem as simple as they were back then. We thought we were just playing another game, like all the other games we've played over the years, but instead we got played, and we didn't even realize it because why would we? Yeah, we are missing key information about Jack's past, but so is he, and we learn about his true origins at the same time he does. This twist hits like a ton of bricks because as far as we knew, we were just playing the game. The design is so linear, so we never questioned why we were going from area to area. The world of Rapture is already so dense with new and foreign ideas and concepts from our own reality that our mind control is plausible. The reason Bioshock's twist works is because it could be applied to any game. What if Zelda wanted to commit genocide against the Gerudo in Ocarina of Time in some form of religious war? What if Dr. Eggman was the last surviving human after a nuclear war that genetically mutated the rest of Mobius? What if Goof Troop on the Super Nintendo wasn't about Goofy and Max drug smuggling for the Mexican cartel? If there's one thing you should take away from Bioshock, let it be this. The next time you sit down to play something, be an Anthem, Final Fantasy, or any narrative-driven game, ask yourself, why am I doing this? Bioshock made us think, not just as humans engaging with a body of text. Rather, it made us reevaluate our actions as gamers, and at the end of the day, that is something no other medium could offer. Hey, thanks for sticking around to the end of the video. I'm Kevin. If you want to see more kind of stuff from me like this, subscribe to the channel, maybe give it a like and share it around. Big thanks to Shepard on Twitch for capturing the gameplay. It was very nice of him. He'll link to his Twitch channel there. And if you liked my voice for whatever reason, I actually have a podcast called Nostalgia Horrors where we review a movie every week. So maybe give it a listen. Until next time.